gods the light could only dream of, and she was ready to.
The oath on the mountain. Open Genesis to chapter 6 and stop before you reach Noah. There are 4 verses. 4 lines that most readers treat as a bridge, a quick explanation before the real story of the flood begins. But they are not a bridge. They are a door, left slightly open, leading into a world that existed before the water came and covered everything. The text says this: as men multiplied on the face of the earth, daughters were born to them, beautiful daughters. And the sons of God, upon seeing them, chose wives from among those women. And from those unions came children, mighty ones, men of renown, giants whose names were feared across the entire ancient world. 4 verses. One of the densest assertions in all of Hebrew scripture. The modern instinct is to soften this, to read those sons of God as pious men from a righteous lineage, a line of good people who married outside their faith. A tragic but ordinary story of cultural compromise. But that is not the oldest reading. Not even close. The Jewish scholars writing before the Christian era, the rabbis of the Second Temple period, were unanimous on this point. The sons of God were not men. They were angelic beings, celestial beings who had left their place above and descended to earth. Not metaphorically, literally. This was not a fringe interpretation. It was the dominant position of the Judeo-Christian tradition for centuries. And the New Testament confirms it without hesitation. The letter of Jude, verse 6, describes angels who did not keep the proper domain, who abandoned their own dwelling place, who now wait, bound in chains of darkness, for a judgment that has not yet arrived. The language is specific. They left. They crossed a boundary they were not meant to cross, and they are still being held for it. Genesis gives the headline, but another text much older, much more detailed, gives the full story. The Book of Enoch, named for the man Genesis describes in a single haunting phrase, that he walked with God, and one day, he simply was not there. The New Testament cites Enoch without apology. The early church took it seriously for centuries before it was set aside and nearly forgotten. And what Enoch records about the years before the flood reads with the coldness of a witness statement. 200 beings whom the text calls watchers descended together upon the summit of Mount Hermon. But before they came down, they did something that reveals this was not impulse. It was not weakness in a single moment. It was a decision. They made an oath, a pact of rebellion, binding every one of them to the same course. The structure of the oath is chilling when you understand what it was designed to do. Samyaza, their chief, feared being the only one to carry the guilt if things went wrong. So he designed an oath that made that impossible. Whoever breaks the pact bears the punishment meant for all the others. Everyone signs. Everyone is equally guilty. No one can turn back. This is not the story of angels who fell from grace in a moment of weakness. This is the story of 200 beings who sat together on a mountain summit and made a rational, deliberate, collective decision to do something that was forbidden. They came down from the mountain. They took wives from among the daughters of men. And from those unions, from that crossing of a boundary that was never meant to be crossed, something new entered the world. Something that had no category in the order of creation. Something that was neither the thing its father was nor the thing its mother was. A new kind of being. Born into a world that had no name for it, no place for it, and ultimately, no mercy for it. Enoch is precise about what followed. The children of the Watchers grew to an enormous size. Their hunger exceeded what the earth could provide. They consumed everything first, every resource humanity had built. And when there was nothing left to consume, they turned on the people who had watched them grow. The blood, Enoch writes, cried out from the ground until it reached the very ears of heaven. And heaven heard it. But before we reach the flood, before we reach the judgment that would come, there is a question that the text walks past without stopping. A question so obvious that its absence is almost more striking than any answer could be. The Nephilim were warriors, giants, men of renown. The text speaks of sons. If there were sons and there were many, logic and biology demand that there were daughters. Where are they? The unnamed daughter. This is the question that no preacher formulates from the pulpit. Genesis says nothing about female offspring. Enoch focuses almost entirely on the male Nephilim, their size, their violence, their consumption of everything around them. The daughters of the Watchers exist in the text the way a shadow exists. You know something cast it, but you can't quite make out what it was. So think about this carefully. And think about it not as mythology. Think about it as biology, as inheritance, as the logic of what gets passed down from parent to child. The father is a celestial being, something with the nature that exists outside of the categories of the natural world, something with a voice, a presence, a power that does not follow the rules of the created order. The mother is human, with everything that means mortality, emotion, the full range of what it is to be flesh. Their sons inherited size, physical dominance, strength that no natural creature could match. They were warriors, visible threats, easy to name and fear. But their daughters would inherit something different. Not the brute force that makes you visible and terrible. Something quieter. Something that operates below the level of the obvious. Beauty that reads as wrong in a way you cannot immediately explain. A voice that does not land in the ear the way a voice should. A presence that affects the people around it before those people understand why they are being affected. Not warriors. Something more difficult to defend against than warriors. Think about what it means to be born into a category that does not exist. No scripture names you. Genesis looks past you. Enoch documents your brothers and ignores you entirely. No judgment is formally pronounced over you because no one has quite worked out what you are or where you fit in the order of things. You are not an angel. Your father fell long before you were born, and whatever claim you might have had to that nature is already broken. You are not fully human. Your mother's bloodline has been altered by something it was never designed to encounter. You carry something in your voice, in your face, in the way you move through space, that marks you as different in a way no one can quite explain. You are not the Nephilim warriors. You are not the men of renown. You are not the category the text bothered to name. You are simply between. And the flood is coming. It is designed, explicitly, to erase what you are. God himself declares that the corruption has reached every corner of the living world. Every intention of the thoughts of man's heart only evil, continually, without pause. The Hebrew offers no nuance there. The corruption is total. But here is the detail that should stop you cold. The watchers are judged and sentenced. Enoch records their punishment in specific, named terms. They are bound, placed in darkness, sealed into the valleys beneath the earth to wait for a final reckoning. Their sentence is pronounced. Their names are recorded. Their guilt is enumerated. The Nephilim warriors die in the flood. Their bodies are destroyed. But even then, even in destruction, Enoch gives them an afterlife of sorts. Their spirits, the text says, will wander the earth, restless, homeless, causing offenses until the day of final judgment. Even in condemnation, they have a category. And the female Nephilim? Nothing. No sentence. No category. No name. No account of what happened to them when the water came. They are simply absent from the record, as if they were too difficult to categorize, and so the scribes moved on. That silence is not neutral. In a text that accounts for almost everything, the measurements of the ark, the precise number of days it rained, the names of Noah's sons, a silence that specific means something. It means someone knew they were there, and chose not to say what became of them. Was it mercy, and a mission that protected something? Or was it something else, the particular discomfort of a scribe confronting a category of being that the existing moral framework had no clean answer for? Here is the uncomfortable question. The one this text has been circling without landing on. She did not choose her father. She did not design her own nature. She did not vote for the oath on the mountain or the crossing of the boundary that brought her into existence. She arrived in a world that was already broken by decisions made before she was born. And when that world was judged, she was swept away with the guilty without being named among them. Is that just? That is not a comfortable question. It was never meant to be. But it is the question that the text leaves open deliberately or otherwise, and it is the question that the rest of the world has been answering, in its own way, for the last 5,000 years. Because she did not disappear. She went somewhere. And 1,000 different peoples, on 1,000 different shores, without any contact with each other, without any shared language or trade route or common ancestor, drew her portrait from memory. CHNG3 What the flood couldn't drown. Before we go further, there is one detail in Enoch that almost no one reads carefully enough. And it changes everything about how we understand what survived the flood. Enoch chapter 7 records something that Genesis omits entirely. The corruption of the Watcher's offspring did not stop at humanity. It spread to the birds, to the beasts, to the reptiles, to the fish. The mixing, the crossing of boundaries that were never meant to be crossed extended into the entire natural world. The flood covered the land. Every high peak, every valley, every field and city and forest. But the flood never reached the bottom of the ocean. Keep that in its place. We will return to it. Now let us talk about what the whole world remembers. Not one culture. Not one tradition. Not one ancient people who dreamed up a sea creature and told stories about it by firelight. Every culture, every continent, every coast, and the portrait they all drew independently, without contact, without collaboration, is specific enough to be disturbing. Start with the Greeks. With Homer. The Odyssey, Book 12. Odysseus is warned before he reaches the Sirens. Not about their appearance. Not about their beauty. About their voice. He is told, with complete precision, that the sound they produce is not like human music. That it bypasses the rational mind entirely. That it steals the will from a man before he is finished registering what he heard. Odysseus, a man who had survived 10 years of war, who had faced monsters and gods and the collapse of everything around him, has himself tied to the mast of his ship. He orders his men to plug their ears with wax. He knows what is coming. He has been warned in explicit detail. And even bound. Even knowing. Even with every rational faculty fully engaged, the text records that the sound nearly drove him to madness. The siren did not use weapons. She used voice. A power that moved through the air and operated on the human mind before the body had any chance to respond. Before armor. Before will. Before reason. There is a detail here that almost no one mentions. In the oldest Greek depictions, the vase paintings, the relief carvings, the versions that existed centuries before the fish tale was added, the siren is not a sea creature. She is a bird. Half woman, half bird. Wings and claws. Always female. Always the voice as the weapon. Always fatal. The fish tale came much later. What never changed was the sex and the mechanism of the power. Now go to Mesopotamia, to the land where Genesis itself places the first steps of human civilization. The Apkallu were beings of ancient Babylonian tradition, half man, half fish, described as messengers from a time before the flood. Wise. Possessed of knowledge that ordinary human beings did not have access to. The historian Berossus recorded one of them, Oannes. A figure with a fish body and a human face, emerging from the sea, coming to teach humanity knowledge that it would not have discovered on its own. Read that again. A hybrid creature, half human, emerging from water, bringing knowledge that should not be in human hands. Knowledge that preceded the flood. Enoch says exactly this about the Watchers. That they descended and taught humanity things that were forbidden: metallurgy, cosmetics, sorcery, astronomy. Knowledge that should have stayed hidden. Babylon sculpted these beings into the walls of their temples.
Yes, I see it.
Centuries before Greece wrote about sirens. centuries before Homer put a single word about a woman's voice onto a page. And the Assyrian priests, the religious specialists of that culture, performed their rituals wearing fish skins, dressed as hybrids, as if the memory of what those beings were had been incorporated into the sacred life of an entire civilization. Now across every ocean, every one of them. In West Africa, Mami Wada. Her name means mother of the waters. She is half woman, half fish or serpent, depending on which people you ask. Astonishing beauty, a voice and a presence that pull men under the surface. She keeps them in a realm that is not the living world, not quite death, not quite life, and in between, a liminal space. Her cult is not regional. It covers West and Central Africa with a consistency that defies independent invention. And when the slave ships crossed the Atlantic, she came with them. She took root in the Caribbean, in Brazil, in Haiti, with the same portrait, the same power, the same language of the in-between. She crossed an ocean on a slave ship and arrived on the other shore completely intact. In Ireland and Scotland, the Selkies, women who shed their seal skin to walk among men. Impossible beauty. An attraction that was not quite natural. And always the sea pulling them back to something that was not the human world. In Japan, the Ninyo, a fish woman. Her flesh, according to the legend, grants immortality to whoever eats it. The gift of a lifespan that exceeds the natural limit. In the Slavic tradition, the Raki, water spirits in the form of women whose beauty was as cold as it was lethal. Their laughter preceded death. Their presence near water was a warning and an invitation, simultaneously. In ancient Syria, the goddess Atargatis, depicted with a woman's torso and a fishtail, worshipped at the height of her temple centuries before the Christian era. In India, the Asparas, the Naginis, female beings of the waters with a lethal magnetism that operated on men specifically, with a precision that the texts describe and then do not try to explain. Stop. Seriously stop and look at what you are observing. These peoples never met each other. They never traded. They never sailed to the same shores. They existed on opposite ends of a planet that had no global communication, no shared media, no cultural exchange that could have transmitted a common myth. And yet every single one of them drew the same portrait. Not a vague sea creature. Not a general monster. The same specific figure, with the same sex, the same connection to water, the same mechanism of power, voice, beauty, attraction, fatality operating specifically on men, with a precision that is too consistent to be coincidence and too widespread to be borrowed. When one culture creates a monster, that is folklore. When the entire world independently creates the same monster with the same identifying features and the same mode of operation, that is not folklore. That is testimony. Now bring back Enoch chapter 7. The corruption spread beyond humanity to affect the entire natural world. The fish, the birds, the beasts. The flood covered the land. It did not reach the bottom of the ocean. The oldest Hebrew texts knew this. They recorded it, They described the sea as something categorically different from the land, a place where what God had not yet fully subjected still dwelled. The book of Job dedicates its most detailed passage to a creature called Leviathan. God himself describes it to Job as a concrete reality, not a symbol, not a poetic image. A specific being with scales and breath and a lair in the darkest depths of the ocean. Invulnerable to any human weapon. Real enough to describe in physical terms. The ancient reader did not look at the ocean the way we do. For them, the sea was not scenery. It was a border between the ordered world and whatever lived on the other side of order. And the female Nephilim, the category the text refused to name, had an entire ocean to disappear into. We have been asking the wrong question this entire time. The question has always been framed the same way. Do the female Nephilim become the sirens? Is the legend real? Is there a historical event behind all this mythology? But that is not the most interesting question the evidence raises. There is a deeper one, a structural one that sits in the architecture of the story itself. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Look at the original event. The Watchers, male celestial beings, saw the daughters of men, saw their beauty, and chose to descend. Chose to cross the boundary between the world above and the world below. Chose to pursue women who were human and mortal and entirely, fundamentally different from what they were. The direction of movement is specific. Supernatural, descending toward human. Pulled by attraction. Crossing a boundary that was not meant to be crossed. And leaving behind an offspring that carried the weight of both natures without belonging fully to either one. Now look at what every global legend describes. Female beings carrying a nature that is not entirely human, drawn toward men. Pulling men toward them. Crossing the boundary between the surface world and the world beneath the water. An attraction that operates in the same direction the Watcher's attraction operated, but from the opposite starting point. The fathers fell from above, drawn to women. The daughters rose from below, drawing men. The same dynamic. The same forbidden crossing. The same impossible attraction across a boundary that was never meant to exist. But read in reverse, as if the event had an echo, an inversion, a mirror image written into the world by the logic of what that original crossing had set in motion. This is not stated anywhere in Scripture. Not in Genesis. Not in Enoch. Not in any verse with these specific words. The Bible does not say that the female Nephilim became sirens. That needs to be said plainly and honestly. What the Bible records is a corruption so total that it reached everything, every living thing on the face of the earth. What Enoch adds is that this corruption extended into the natural world, into the creatures of the sea and the air. What the flood erased was the land, not the ocean floor. The rest, the global legends, the consistent portrait, the identical features drawn by peoples who never shared a coastline, that is cultural evidence. Observable, verifiable, worthy of serious examination. But not Scripture. What we can say is this. The pattern exists. The portrait exists. It is too precise to dismiss and too widespread to explain with ordinary folklore theory. And it points, with a consistency that is genuinely disturbing, toward water and toward the feminine. But here is the part that Scripture itself phrases in its own way, in its own language, and never quite resolves. She did not ask to exist. None of the offspring of the Watchers asked to be born. They arrived in a world that their parents had already broken, carrying a nature that the existing order had no category for, and they were judged for the circumstances of their birth along with the choices of their fathers. The Watchers chose. They deliberated on a mountain summit, and they voted, and they swore an oath, and they descended of their own free will. Their guilt is as clean and as documented as guilt gets. But their daughters? Here is where the question sits. Not the question of the legend. The deeper one. If you were born into a nature you did not design, carrying the consequence of a decision made before you existed, living in a world that had no name for what you were, and then the flood came, and everything you were was erased, without a verdict, without a trial, without even a line of text to record that you had been there. Is that the story of a monster? Or is it the story of something much closer to human experience than we are comfortable admitting? The question of what we inherit biologically, spiritually, generationally, and what we owe for it, is not a question that ended with the flood. It is the oldest question in human moral life. And the female Nephilim, whatever she was, whatever she became, stands at the center of it in a way that no other figure in pre-flood scripture does. She is the clearest case of the question we have never been able to answer. What is owed to someone who did not choose the nature they were born with? Genesis left it open. Enoch left it open. 5,000 years of global legend has been circling it without landing. And perhaps that is why the memory never died. The book of Revelation is the last book of the Bible. Its final vision, the new heaven and the new earth, contains a list of what will no longer exist in the restored creation. No more death. No more mourning. No more crying. No more pain. These are the great promises. The ones quoted at funerals and written on memorial stones. The ones that have carried people through a grief for 2,000 years. And then, tucked into that list, is a line that theologians have been quietly uncomfortable with since John wrote it on the island of Patmos. No more sea. Read it slowly. In the new creation, the final, restored, fully healed version of everything that exists, there will be no ocean. No deep water. No abyss. The sea will simply cease to exist. Why would that be listed among the great promises? Why would the absence of the ocean rank alongside the absence of death and pain as something worth announcing? For the ancient Hebrew mind, the answer is not geographic. The sea was never just water. It was a category, a word for what had not yet been subjected to the full order of creation. The deep, the abyss, the Tehom, the primordial dark water that existed before God spoke light into the world. In the Hebrew imagination, the ocean was the border between the ordered world and whatever had not yet been fully ordered. Leviathan lives there. Job describes it at God's instruction, a creature that no human weapon can touch, that exhales fire, that dwells in the darkest reach of the deep. God describes it not as a symbol but as a neighbor. Something that exists in the world and has not yet been finally answered for. Rahab, another sea monster, appears in the Psalms as something God subdues with his own strength. Already known. Already a recurring problem. Something that keeps having to be addressed. The sea, for the ancient reader, was where the unresolved lived. Where the things that the flood had not been able to reach were still, quietly, present. And so when Revelation says no more sea, the ancient ear heard something very specific in that phrase. Not the disappearance of a body of water. The closing of a wound that had been open since before the flood. The final resolution of something that the flood itself had only partially addressed. If the flood was designed to erase the corruption, and Enoch says the corruption reached into the ocean, into the fish, into the creatures of the deep, then the flood was always going to be incomplete. The land was covered. The surface was washed clean. But the abyss, the deep water, was never touched by those 40 days of rain. No more sea means no more abyss. No more border between the ordered world and the unresolved. No more place for what has not yet been fully judged to wait in the dark. Every legend, every shore, every voice that rose from the water and pulled man toward a boundary they were never meant to cross. Finally, permanently, irrevocably sealed. The flood was not the end of the story. It was the first chapter of the ending. A beginning of a resolution that will not be complete until the sea itself ceases to exist and there is nowhere left for the unnamed and the uncategorized to wait. That is what the line in Revelation means. That is why it is in the list. And the female Nephilim, the one that Genesis refused to name, that Enoch passed over in silence, that the entire ancient world remembered anyway in the only language available to them, she is the figure at the center of the unresolved. She is why the wound is still open. She is why the sea still exists. And she is why the final promise of the restored world includes the most unexpected abolition in the entire canon of Scripture. Think about that. The Creator of everything determined that a fully healed world, a world with no more death, no more crying, no more pain, also requires a world with no ocean, no deep water. No place where what the flood could not reach is still, in the dark, waiting. Something survived the flood that was not supposed to survive. And the new creation will be the first world since before the Watchers descended from Mount Hermon that does not have to account for it. Thousands of years. Hundreds of cultures. 100 different names in 100 different languages, spoken by people who never shared a coastline or a trade route or a common word for what they were describing. One portrait. A woman. Born of a union that was never meant to happen. Carrying a voice that operates on men the way a weapon operates before they can respond, before they can choose, before they even understand what is happening to them. Living in the space between what heaven allowed and what earth could hold. Neither condemned by name nor released by mercy. Simply persistent. She has been telling this story longer than we have been writing it down. The only question left is whether we are ready, finally, to actually hear it. Or whether, like every sailor who came before us, we will hear the sound from the water and steer directly toward it anyway. The Book of Enoch goes much deeper than one flood and one generation. If this opened a door you did not know was there, tell me in the comments. If you had been on that ark on the 15th night, and you heard something calling from the water below, would you have gone to the railing and looked? Or would you have been wise enough to stay where you were? Because your answer says more about you than it does about her. Subscribe, because what we have covered today is only the surface. And the deeper we go into what Enoch recorded, the more the questions multiply. There are many more doors, and we have only just found the first one.